Well, good evening. I'm going to call tonight's meeting to order, and before we go into the agenda, I'd like a motion to amend the agenda to resume a public briefing session, which we started earlier, that will continue on with the Langley RCMP. Someone moved by Councillor James, seconded by Councillor Hall. All of those in favor, opposed if any, it is carried. Before we get into it, if you don't mind, we're going to just do the public hearing minutes from December the 3rd. Someone like to move those? Moved by Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Schaefer. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all of those in favor, it is carried. Then regular meeting minutes from December the 3rd, 2012, moved by Councillor James, seconded by Councillor Arnold. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all of those in favor, it is carried. And now we will resume our briefing session, and Superintendent Cook, and for the press and the members of the public, one of which is sitting there, and those watching on our webcast. We are going through a report from the RCMP. We had a public briefing session that started at 5 o'clock and is carrying on now into our regular meeting because we want to finish it again in a public forum. So Superintendent Cook, it's over to you.
I believe Councillor Arnold may have some questions rising out of the last portion of what we were discussing.
Councillor Arnold?
Yeah, on that last slide, you mentioned was...
Turn your microphone, please. Thanks.
Thank you. On that last slide, one of the areas you mentioned was Alder Grove. Now you said there's 5 areas?
Yes, for statistical purposes,
okay.
Langley detachment.
So you do keep separate stats?
Yes.
For each of those areas?
Yes.
Okay. And then the other question that I had was, you were talking about how at any given time there are 3 officers in the city.
Approximately, yes.
Okay. Now, I have also heard that Langley is a training facility, or training detachment. If you have more than one officer in a vehicle, I assume one of them is training the other?
Generally, if you have 2 members in a police vehicle, one is a cadet undergoing training. I don't think it's fair to characterize Langley detachment as a training detachment, though I don't know that we receive any more cadets than any other detachment does.
Okay, but if, for instance, there are 2 people in the vehicle, one's training the other one, does that count as 2 of the 3, or?
No, the cadet field.
And are we paying for 2 officers there or for 1?
No, the cadet field training program is a 6-month program. Generally, the cadet will be with their trainer for the first 2 to 3 months, and after that they'll be out on their own, assuming that they're doing well. And when I said 10 members, generally that's 10 operational cars for all of Langley that we may have on shift at any given time. This past year, Steph just passed me a note, this past year Langley detachment has had 3 cadets, which is definitely on the low end of the scale.
Yeah, so so when you say 3, you're talking 3 vehicles, whether there's 1 or 10 in there, there's just, no, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Carry on, please.
Okay, I'll start speaking a little bit about efficiency and effectiveness in our achievements. As we mentioned earlier, we recognize that policing is one of the largest, if not the largest, components of the city's budget every year. And the largest part of our costs are associated to the human resources that we manage. And we try to do so to the best of our ability and deploy them as effectively and strategically as we can. And that involves the use of the planning processes that we've spoken to, and utilizing a number of community partnerships and volunteers. Now, some of the things that we've done to increase efficiencies, and I've spoken to a number of these already, but we focus on prolific offenders. We have our CompStat model that we follow. We have a number of partnerships. I think I mentioned earlier that I was down in the fellow in charge of our community policing unit, and he had a list on his desk of different agencies that we had partnerships with for his units, and that list had 26 different organizations down on it. We're very engaged in that regard. We've changed the direction of our drug enforcement that we're focusing on. We're working right now on an enhanced community policing focus, and not at a stage where I'm able to speak to that here, but certainly I've met with the mayor a couple of times and looking at some significant changes and improvements as to how we're providing our community-based policing programs, and I'm optimistic that as we refine that, it'll be seen as a very positive thing in the community. We've spoken earlier of the integrated policing teams that are working throughout the Lower Mainland. Those units allow us to perform specialized work at a level that simply would not be possible for Langley City on its own. And then one thing I'll mention quickly, something that I'm quite happy with, a new program that we started this year is our civil forfeiture or proceeds of crime position. We took one of our drug unit positions and converted that into a proceeds of crime investigator. And that's using both federal and provincial legislation for offense-related property, using that legislation to seize property used in the commission of crimes. That might involve a house that's used for drug trafficking or for cultivation of marijuana. It might involve vehicles used for break and enter. And this member's sole responsibility is to be targeting these pieces of property, and by property I'm not talking land, whatever that property may be, and to hit the criminals where it hurts. And to give you an example of the success of this position over the past year, and it's probably been about 11 months that he's been operational. In the past 11 months, he's initiated seizure processes against property worth just over $4 million. And thus far, he's been successful in having $536,000 turned over to the Crown. And the rest of the money is still in the process. It's a lengthy process. Very, very positive, and I want the bad guys to know that if they're committing crime in Langley, if they choose to use a pickup truck to break into a store and then drive off, and we had a file like this recently, caught the bad guys, that vehicle was seized. We've had houses seized, and we're pursuing those things, and hopefully the message gets through. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the comparative statistics. We do look at statistics to see how we're doing in the community, what impact our policing is or is not having. As Steph spoke to you about ComStat, we're looking at the crime trends to dictate how we deploy our resources. And compared to, we look at our stats in comparison to other communities. Now this chart, you don't have to focus on this too much, it's kind of busy. The following slides break this one down into smaller components. These statistics are compiled by the provincial and federal governments, and for the purposes of this chart, we've looked at a number of communities throughout the Lower Mainland. I didn't cherry pick them. I asked our crime analysts to look at some communities that were similar in size or our neighboring communities in order that we could compare ourselves to them, both RCMP and municipal departments. Now this is what we'll often refer to as the pop to cop ratio, the number of police officers per, or number of the population served per police officer. And Langley City actually looks very good in this regard, in that of this comparator group, Langley has the lowest ratio. So we have one police officer for every 522 residents in the city. That does look good, however, it does not begin to provide the entire picture. This next slide, and this is the opposite side of the scale, is the crime rate. As you can see, again, in this comparator group, Langley City has quite significantly the highest crime rate. This is number of criminal code offenses per 1,000 permanent residents. Every community has very different demographics. And Langley City has certainly some unique issues that contribute to the challenges that we face. I've heard the mayor speak of quite proudly of the city having amongst the highest or the highest ratio of affordable housing in the Lower Mainland, which is obviously a very positive thing. But it does provide some challenges. Often that's attracting some society's more marginalized individuals. They can be targeted by criminals. We have some major shopping centers, which brings with it a number of thefts from vehicles, shoplifting. We have licensed establishments, high population density, apartment buildings. All these things can be crime attractors, and that contributes to the crime rate that we face here in the city. And to give you an example, and this is going outside the city, but there's a new park and ride in the township in an area that has historically had very low crime rates, primarily because there's nothing there or has been nothing there. My fear is that with that park and ride being there, and not your issue to be concerned about, but something I look at, we'll see a significant increase in the numbers there, the crime numbers. We'll have thefts of vehicles, thefts from vehicles, and when we look at those crime maps next time around, it'll look very bad that suddenly things are out of control there. But the reality of the situation is that certain developments can be crime attractors in different areas. So we'll look at the criminal caseload per member. As you saw on the first slide, Langley City has a very good, from my perspective, very good pop to cop ratio. We have a lot of police officers for the number of citizens. That being said, in this comparator group, our police officers still have the highest criminal caseload per member, sitting at 73 criminal cases per member per year. That's in addition to everything else they do. But one of the statistics that is collected is the number of criminal cases per member. Now, if you take Langley out of the equation here, the average in this comparator group is 54 criminal cases. That puts us in Langley City about 35% above the average, and would require a significant increase in members to bring Langley City to the average there. Again, this would be one of those issues that contributes to why you might not see officers out on foot doing foot patrols, bike patrols as often as we might like to have them. Here we have the calls for service by member. Langley City is basically in the middle, and this would include calls for service such as general public disorder issues, collisions, noisy parties, assistance to the general public. And with Langley City being right in the middle there, that would suggest to me that a great number of calls they're dealing with are criminal in nature, are the serious calls, and that's why they're number one in the previous category. I'm going to look at total criminal code offenses here, and I've got two communities, the city and the township. And I added this at the last minute as a result of the press that we received last week in the province with regard to the crime severity index. And I don't know if you all saw, certainly I sent it out by email to you, the information that I forwarded to the province newspaper after that hit the media. And subsequently they printed a retraction because there were some pretty significant errors that impacted on the numbers. That being said, Langley City, like every community, does have its crime issues. And I had our people at Ops Strategy Branch crunch the numbers further. They're the ones who look at the stats. They were able to go to the original data set that Stats Canada was using and looked at it, and they gave me the real numbers once we factored in the changes where the errors had been made. And the point that was made to me by the fellow who looked at the numbers for me is that every community has a different starting place. The crime severity index that was highlighted in the paper and by Vancouver Police, I believe, started in 2009. Every community started at a different place. The crime rate in West Vancouver clearly is very different than the crime rate in Surrey or Langley City or Abbotsford. And the important thing to look at is the changes year by year, the progress that you're making. And here you can see the crime trend for the city in blue. It's been going down steadily since 2002, where it was approximately 200 criminal code offenses per year per 1,000 population, down to about 135, 140 or so, which is a pretty significant drop on percentage basis in a 9 or a 10-year span. With regard to the crime severity index, once the proper numbers were worked in there, Langley City went down 8.3% between 2010 and 2011, versus Vancouver, where this was first publicized, having gone down 6.6%. So I think in relation, we're making some good strides there. Now we'll talk about accountability.
Derek, before
yes.
you go on, just a comment. I think one of the things that when you look at per 1,000 population, if you've got a low population, then your real numbers of incidents is lower than when you've got a much higher population, right?
Absolutely, and as was cited in that paper article, they incorrectly attributed 2 homicides to Langley City. there hadn't been 2 homicides, there had been 0 homicides. However, for a community the size of Langley, 2 homicides with a population of 27,000 or so, that's a huge amount. And so it doesn't take a lot to drive those numbers and change those percentages.
And that was the issue that I think we tried to correct, is that, number one, the wrong numbers were attributed to us, and number two, even if they would have been here, they were 2. They may have had 6 in another community, but because their population or their previous cases were that much higher, then the severity index didn't go up proportionately as high or as fast.
Absolutely.
So it just takes the numbers and blows them way out of proportion.
So we've spent a lot of time at the beginning of this presentation speaking of our financial accountability, where the city's money is being spent, touched a little bit on the review processes that we have in place, and what we do to ensure we remain in budget every year. We've spoken of crime stats, crime trends, some of the crime drivers. I'd like to talk a little bit about our accountability to the community and with regard to the overall service we provide. I think to some extent there's a public perception out there, a perception driven by the media, that the RCMP reports to Ottawa, and some may suggest or believe that the RCMP has a little regard for the concerns of the community. And I would strongly state that that is wrong. I think we've made great strides.
It's okay. I know the Heimlich or CPR.
You're doing the mouth-to-mouth, not me.
Yeah.
I think we've...
They say you don't need to do that anymore. Carry on.
You can tell that to Ted as he's laying on the floor. Anyways, we've made great strides over the years, and I think all police organizations have with regard to our accountability to the public. First of all, I wasn't chosen as your police chief by the RCMP. That was a process undertaken that the mayor and Francis were very involved in. I've spoken of some of our accountability through our strategic planning, our annual performance plan, identifying the community's policing priorities and how to best address those. I present regularly to mayor and council on crime trends and policing activities. I meet regularly with both the mayor and the CAO to discuss policing issues, concerns, our effectiveness. Some of those are scheduled, some of those are as a result of a phone call I'll get from Francis or from the mayor and say, this is something that's come up, can we meet? And we do. Every month, I or Inspector Delay attend meetings of the Police Advisory Committee. I'm certainly open to calls and emails from the mayor and council at any time with regard to any issues that have come forward, and I get those. At a district level, we have the mayor's forums and the CAO forums. Those are hosted by Assistant Commissioner Lipinski. All the mayors and CEOs from the Lower Mainland attend and discuss any issues that are coming up, any issues that communities are experiencing. My accountability is here. I stress out over Langley issues. I stress out over our crime stats. I stress out over being on the front page of the Vancouver Province. I don't concern myself with what goes on in Ottawa. I've never had a phone call from Ottawa telling me how to police Langley. I've never had a phone call from the district office telling me how to police Langley. I do get phone calls from the mayor. I do get phone calls from the CAO. If Mayor Fassbender brought out his cell phone right now, he would have my cell phone number, my office number, my home number, my cell phone that I use when I'm away on holidays, and I get those phone calls. I've had phone calls when I'm on the field coaching baseball. I get phone calls in the evening at home. I get phone calls when issues arise. And that's what I expect in the role that I fill for the community. But that accountability is there, and we try to be as responsive as we can be. And I don't want to fool you. There are things that Ottawa controls. There are checks and balances in place, and this is a Treasury Board rule, not the RCMP, but between the two communities, there's a budget of $26–30 million. The most I can spend at one time is $10,000. That's a check and balance in place to make sure that I don't go wild with the checking account and spend more than I should. Beyond $10,000, we have to undergo a procurement process. Langley City will likely never be able to dictate what the recruiting policies are, never be able to dictate whether my shirt is white, yellow, green, or blue. But those aren't the things I think that any of you consider to be important. I think the things that are important is the service that we're providing to the community, our responsiveness to that, and willingness to adapt what we're doing. I'll speak briefly about the enhanced policing services, and I'll be able to go through these quickly. These are some of the services that the RCMP brings to the community that you don't necessarily think as the package that you're paying for. And these are services that you're not paying for. Primarily, they're paid for by the provincial or federal governments, but they are RCMP units that we can draw upon at any time. And in some cases, they're well known. In some cases, we do draw upon them quite regularly. Perhaps the best known is the Air 1 program. The Air 1 program is actually 3 helicopters, and there are several planes at our disposal through E-Division and Lower Mainland Air Services. Invaluable service. Should have had it many years before we did, and we call upon Air 1 very frequently. We catch a lot of bad guys that we would not catch by any other means. Some of the units at our disposal aren't so well known. Cattle theft unit. Who would have thought we have a provincial cattle theft unit? But we do. Not something I ever wanted to do, not somewhere I ever wanted to work. I'm glad there are other people who want to. And I can't imagine Langley City will ever have a big cattle theft problem, but I'm using this as an example of the wide variety of services that we have out there available to us. Explosives disposal unit, we do call upon them with some infrequent regularity. Outlaw motorcycle gang unit, again, it's a unit we've actually had a person from the provincial unit working rate of our detachment funded at the provincial level, but addressing some of our motorcycle gang issues. Illegal gaming unit, something that we could have a need to call upon in the community. Forest crimes unit, again, not one of those units we'll ever have to call upon, but it is a huge issue in other parts of the province. Next page, and this is just a sample. I don't know if you can read those there, but again, just a small sample of the wide variety of units and resources that we can call upon at any time. And another page of these. Some of these we do use at times: the Integrated Child Exploitation Team, Integrated Sexual Predator Observation Team, National Sex Offender Registry, Provincial Prostitution Unit, Youth Strategies Unit, and it goes on and on. And again, this is a very small portion of the units that are out there and we can call upon. So for our last slide, I just hope that we've addressed some of your concerns, answered some questions for you. Certainly we try to be fiscally responsible. We have a number of checks and balances in place. My biggest concern is to ensure that we're responsive to community needs. We're addressing the issues that the community is facing. We have a number of integrated services, a consolidation of police services. And we've really seen a big transition over the last few years in trying to be very strategic with the focus on prolific offenders, our crime reduction model, and intelligence-led policing. If there's any other questions, now's the time for it.
Thank you. Councillor Hall?
Earlier in your presentation, you brought up a number of things. One that really hit me was the obtaining of warrants. I remember you'd sent out a memo earlier, and at that time you talked about the difficulty of obtaining warrants. Why aren't there regional offices for the obtaining of warrants? Like, why would one have to go to Burnaby as it now exists, and what politically could we move on to encourage some kind of a movement in that area to make that something that you could do more easily and effective?
I won't speak with any expertise as to what the genesis was for that change of going to one centralized center. I'll tell you what I believe the issues were. The JJP Center, Judicial Justice of the Peace Center in Burnaby, services the entire province. Places like Langley, Surrey, Abbotsford, it probably wasn't a big issue for them to have access to Justices of the Peace, after hours JPs, to sign these warrants. Places like Valemont, Sayke, other locations, very small communities, it was probably much more of an issue, much more difficult to obtain that. The JPs, a critical part of the service we have. On weekends, we may have prisoners. Langley might have 3, 4, 5, 6 prisoners in custody who we're taking before a Justice of the Peace. In the old days, the JP would come down on Saturday morning, would come down on Sunday morning, and it's almost like holding a little court session. We'd bring the prisoner before the JP, read out the charges, what happened, and what we want. We'd like this person held in custody to attend court Monday morning, or we'd like them released on conditions, not to have contact with Steph Drolet or whatever it was. And I expect that provincially, province-wide, that became very difficult for the province to manage, for the Attorney General's office to manage. And this was probably seen as a way to provide a global service, a consistent level of service throughout the province. Unfortunately, in some of the bigger centers, it's been a little problematic and impacted on how we do business. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just say one of the greater challenges goes back to the level of evidence that's actually required to go into these documents. While that's not helpful in terms of your question, it's a reality that we're having to deal with. We're talking volumes of information versus yesteryear, right? And some of the specialization in terms of JP's understanding that in terms of what is required, what the courts will accept, that too has played into, I think, some of the decisionary process to bring it all together. So there are challenges that both we face and obviously the JP faces.
And just to provide a little more clarity, because I could have confused an issue there, we have this one center for the entire province. The criminal code does allow provisions where you can apply for a search warrant by telephone, by fax. The issue is that you're only allowed to do that when it's not practical to attend before a justice of the peace. So in the Lower Mainland, we've had arguments with JPs as to whether or not it's practical from Langley to drive in rush hour traffic to Burnaby to get it done, and basically that's where it stands. Whereas the Valements and the Seikays of the world can apply by telephone. So which makes it much easier for them than they may have had in the past, where there might not be a JP available in their community, or the JP might be away on holidays. Steph was just whispering in my ear here recently about a warrant that we attempted to get here within the last couple of weeks on Friday, and it took 12 hours with the issues that we faced. And his opinion was that under normal circumstances, under the old way, he probably could have had that within an hour or two.
And I can add something. I know that the province, the Minister of Justice, they have a review that's going on right now about a number of those issues, and there was a report that came out on the courts, and included in that was a section, and you can go on the Minister of Justice website, about JPs and how they could be better deployed and brought in rather than having to wait for full-fledged judges to be put into place at certain levels. So that's all being reviewed, and one of the things that'll come out of that review, it's called the BC Policing Strategy, will be some more public consultation. They'll be coming back out to councils and communities and saying, here's what we heard about some of the issues, both from the communities and from the police agencies, and where we can improve efficiency, because it gets down to the time. Every time an officer is tied up for a prolonged period of time, that takes them out of their regular duties, and that's very costly for all of us. So that is underway as well, and I think in the next year or two, you're going to see some really hard looks at how to change some of that to affect.
There's no doubt a lot of decisions made at levels above the city can have a pretty significant impact on policing and policing costs, and I'll go back to what I spoke of earlier, just the courthouse alone. We've never done the analysis, but I have to think that over the course of a year, with all the time spent just commuting either to Surrey or to Abbotsford to court, it's eating up a lot of man hours and a lot of dollars.
The other thing that's happening on the National Contract Management Committee level with the federal government is to say, if you're going to implement a new piece of legislation, you should really figure out what the impact is ultimately on the delivery mechanism, which is us. And there have been decisions about cameras in jails, for example. Great idea in the minds of the people who made that report, but the financial implication. And if there's no offsetting support, then it falls on us, because it's not a, if you'd like to do it, it's a mandate. You have to do it. We have to pay for it. It's never built into our budget. Mm-hmm. And in the past, we weren't given enough time to even plan for it. So it was, you need to do it, and you need to do it now. And so there is a willingness, I think, to look at the implications of those kind of things, because it affects us directly.
A very real example is what I spoke of earlier with mail theft, community mailboxes. Probably a great decision financially for Canada Post, but then suddenly we're faced with all these mail thefts that we never had before, and we now have to investigate.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Martin?
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have a question. I have a comment. I feel encouraged, more encouraged by the last 2 hours. I think as a member of council, it is difficult sometimes because we don't really have any control over the budget. And as you said, it's the biggest part of our budget. It's $9 million. And if you break that down, that's $2.25 million per square mile in the city of Langley to police it. So it seems like a lot of money. And I'm encouraged because I believe that you are going to look at places where you can save some money. And I think we all have to do that in this time. And I was happy to hear that. And I think all the services that you provide that we don't even think about was good to know too. So on my own personal behalf, I'd like to thank you very much. It is encouraging to have that report given to us.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. And I think that one of the things that we have under the new contract is a real, to your point, Councillor Martin, is a real recognition that communities need to know. We need to know why it's costing what it is. We need to have more predictability moving forward. So it isn't just a bill arriving and saying, here, pay for it. For example, carbines. There is a classic case where the superintendent will come to council and say, here's why the carbines are important, because people may have that question. And secondly, here's how many will be deployed in your community given that case. And it's not our place as politicians to tell the police how to police, but it is our place to understand why it costs what it does. And I think that change and that shift is a huge shift that is going to provide more transparency and more accountability. And there's going to have to be changes at the RCMP level in terms of how they capture information so they can provide it to us. And there's a cost associated with that as well. And that's one of the things that's happening at the national level, where the systems have to be put into place to provide the information in a timely and effective fashion. So Superintendent Cook and everybody else, thank you for being here. This will be a more common occurrence as we move along, especially on the financial business side of it. And we will be having more presentations in the future as some of these pieces get put into place. So I want to thank you, and there's never enough time to get into everything that we'd like to, and I do want to thank you for putting the effort in to be here on behalf of all of council and the community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move into the remainder of the agenda. There are no other petitions and delegations. Moving right into committee minutes. The first one that we have minutes on is the Parks Environment Advisory Committee, and there is a motion that will come out of that. Councillor Hall, if you wanted to speak to that, and then you can make the recommendation, and we'll bring it forward. Thank you, gentlemen.
Last year, this committee initiated an event to celebrate or participate in Earth Day. They created a display downstairs. It was well received. This committee has no budget at all. And last year, what they did was they came to council, they requested $500. Ultimately, they spent $156.40 on supplies. They would like to do the initiative again this year, and they have brought forward this recommendation that the Parks and Environment Advisory Committee recommend council approve a request for up to $500 to provide supplies for the 2013 Earth Day display. I failed to mention that the Earth Day display actually lasted a month. So it's a little more substantive than a day. So there's the request. I'll move the recommendation.
Is there a seconder? So the motion is up to 500, so if we don't use it. And the funding source, Mr. Chung?
Your Worship, it comes from the engineering operating account.
Thank you. And so we would have that in the budget to provide that. Any other questions? Seeing none, all of those in favor? Opposed, if any? The motion is carried. Anything else on that committee report? No, I didn't see anything else in the minutes. All right, moving on from there, we're going to move right into the mayor's report. The next regular council meeting, believe it or not, is Monday, January the 14th, 2012, 13. Got it. And it'll be a televised meeting, and then the next one after that, because of, we have back-to-back weeks, so we'll have 2 meetings in a row in January. And then Metro Vancouver. Councillor Martin, you have nothing that you want to bring up? Any questions on any information anyone's received on Metro? Councillor Hall?
Could I just backtrack to those meetings? How does that dovetail in with the budget? When is the first public announcement of proposed budget?
Mr. Light?
We're meeting with council on the 12th, and we'll be advertising following that meeting. It'll go into the local newspapers, and then the first budget meeting will be Monday, February 3rd. I'm not sure what the date is, but it's the first week in February when it brings us to council.
Yeah, we'll update that schedule as well.
Thank you.
Okay, then moving on to library happenings. Councillor Schaefer. Are you okay? You're not choking?
It's
Good.
great now.
Good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have one item. It's for the kids here at the library. It's for kids of all ages. They're invited to come and make a Santa, a snowman, or reindeer, or an elf ornament using the buttons provided, or bring your own. And if you want to do something different, you can create a winter picture using buttons to decorate, and registration is required. That's one of the last programs here in the library, and that's on Friday, December 21st from 2 to 3 o'clock. And it should be a great little outing for the kids. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Friday the 21st. Great. And I hope our superintendent and them were outside and went after that guy that just went by. Okay, moving on to organic waste collection. Mr. Vlieg.
Thank you, Your Worship. Members of Council, I'm here to update Council and the community on the status of the program. You remember 2 weeks ago I had this presentation, and I've got it slightly adapted to reflect current conditions. So last week we had the door hanger distributed to sort of prime the pump, so to speak. And we currently have Stepping Stones putting together a package of information that is going to be, they're going to start distributing that package starting tomorrow over the course of the next week. So if residents can start to look for it. Included in that package will be the green can sticker. There'll be 2 of them in the package. Members of Council have this package in front of them. I left a copy of it. Included in the package are a grand total of 4 different things. So we have a letter from the mayor, and on the back of the letter is a list of frequently asked questions and some tips for convenient and happy green can collection. So we would encourage members of the public to have a good read through that. We've also included a fridge magnet in the package. And that fridge magnet is very much focused on the green can in terms of what items are acceptable to include in the green can and what items shouldn't be included in the green can. So we think that that's going to be a handy reminder for residents in terms of figuring out what needs to go into the can. As I mentioned before, there are 2 of the new green can decals so residents can put that onto their yard waste containers. And then finally, as we do every year, there's a new calendar and map included in the package. This year's is a little bit different, and I just want to take Council through that a minute. So the solid waste calendar and map, the difference is that we've broken the city down. There's still basically 4 zones, but we've broken it down into A zone and B zone to reflect the fact that we have garbage collection every other week. So if you look at the example that's up on the screen, for example, you'll see that the first week in January has a little A beside it. Get my cursor. So you've got the A beside that first week, and then a B beside the second week, and A the third week, etc. So if you happen to live, so if we'll pick on His Worship, who happen to know lives in this darker green B area, your first garbage collection then will occur on Wednesday, January the 9th. So you will not have garbage collection on Thursday the 3rd. So, and if you happen to live on the other side of the creek in the A zone, then you will receive garbage collection that first week, but not the second week. So what we've tried, working with our contractor, Mterra, we've developed this calendar and the map as a way to hopefully that the community will clearly understand the garbage collection. So we want to reinforce the fact that we will be collecting the green can, so all of your kitchen organics and yard waste, and the blue box will be collected every week. The garbage, whatever's left over, the solid waste, will be collected every other week according to the new calendar that we're distributing. So if you live in an A zone, then you'll get garbage collection that first week of January, and if you're in one of the B zones, then your garbage collection starts the second week of January. And in addition, and we're just in the process of finalizing that, we're also going to be putting together a reminder sticker so that if people, we recognize that this is something new for the community, that if they by accident put out the garbage on the wrong week, we're just going to put a polite little reminder sticker onto the garbage can stating, reminding folks that it's not your week to be putting out the garbage. So in terms of the actions that we've taken out so far, again, I just want to remind folks that the green waste and organics we're going to be collecting every week, and there's no limit on the number of cans that you can put out. Similarly with the blue box recyclables, no limit. We'll be collecting 2 cans of garbage every other week. We will have stickers for extra cans of garbage available at the City Hall, at the Douglas Rec Center, and at Tim's. As I mentioned, the door hanger has already been sent out, and we're busy putting together the information packages, and they're going to start distributing those tomorrow. We're also putting information up on our website and distributing out through our social media, and we've done briefing sessions with both the Langley Advance and the Langley Times, and there was already one article in the local paper. So we're encouraged by this, and we're going to be continue to put more information out through our website and through the press in the next couple of weeks. And of course, staff will be available to answer any questions that the public may have up to and including the December 24th, and then again, starting again on January the 2nd.
The electronic signs, did you want to speak about those?
Thank you for reminding me, Mr. Mayor. We've also installed 4 electronic variable message signs at key points throughout the city, just as a way to remind the community that we are starting a new collection program starting January the 2nd, and to make sure that they please keep their eye open for this information package.
Thank you. Councillor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Mr. Valik, this is to the first time in my recollection, you're going to have a Saturday pickup on Saturday, January the 5th, which is normally a Friday pickup. And then you're going to have one in a year from now again on that, which would normally be a Friday pickup on a Saturday. So you're having a Saturday pickup in that zone that has normally a Friday pickup.
Councillor Schaefer, through the chair, thank you for the reminder. Because the statutory holiday falls on a normal collection day, the contractor has elected to do the additional collection on a Saturday. We've pushed that information out on our social media as well as on our website, and we're trying to get that information out as quickly as we can because it also applies starting next, I can say that now, yes, next week, because next week, Tuesday, being Christmas Day, being the statutory holiday, there will be no collection. So anybody whose collection day was normally a Tuesday, next week will be Wednesday. The Wednesday normal day will be Thursday, etc. And so if you were a Friday, next week the week of the 24th, your collection day will be Saturday.
Councillor Hall?
I have great faith that most people will try to participate in this program in an honest way, but what happens if someone decides that they're going to sneak their garbage in amongst their green waste in some way? Now, the people dumping wouldn't be able to see it until they actually get the bin in. So you talked about a sticker being put on that suggests that, well, sorry, you messed up and you put it out the wrong day, but is there like a warning sticker that's issued or something, almost like a warning ticket suggesting that, yeah, we caught you, and it's going to incur us some kind of penalty or fine or extra tipping fee if it went all the way to the collector? So have we anticipated that at all?
Councillor Hall, through the chair. Good question. The material aren't banned from the landfill. What we're trying to do is take a more positive approach and to encourage folks to use the green can for their kitchen scraps, for the simple reason that there's a couple of key benefits to it. The first, of course, is that there's an environmental benefit. By not having the organics go into a landfill, we reduce the amount of greenhouse gases, and we obtain a benefit by composting that material, and then the compost can get reused. The other more tangible benefit for the community is that the tipping fee associated with green waste is approximately half that of garbage. So if we see a significant diversion of the kitchen organics out of the garbage stream and into the green waste, there's a potential for cost savings that the city will be able to pass on to the taxpayer. But of course, that's highly dependent on the degree to which the community participates in this program. The more they participate, the greater the potential for cost saving.
I don't think that was the question. The question is, if somebody puts garbage in the green waste, do we have some way to tell them, you don't do that, we caught you, we saw you put garbage in there because it's already in the truck? I mean, I don't think they throw it back on their lawn.
No, we won't throw it back on their lawn. About the only way that we'll be able to catch them is if the kitchen waste was right on top and it's not in a bag. If it's buried in the can.
No, you don't get the question. The question is, if I've got my green waste container,
right,
and I've got my kitchen in there and my leaves and grass, okay, and I throw in other garbage that should go into the regular garbage stream.
Oh, my apologies. You're right. I did not understand. If there's garbage in there, then I'll have to confirm that with the hall contractor. But if there is garbage, then when the contractor picks up the material, he has a choice as to whether or not he's going to put it in with the green waste or set it aside and either perhaps put a warning on, or else somehow indicate that it needs to be picked up as garbage.
Councillor Hall?
Yeah. I guess the problem is, I'm just thinking of the mechanics of how they pick it up, right? So if I can't see the garbage at all, and somebody has stuck the garbage in the midst of all this green waste, they would never know until the bin gets dumped. But when it gets tossed over,
yep, then
the hauler would see that. And I'm just wondering if there's a ticketing mechanism or something. And I'm not saying that, it's a first-timer, but maybe there needs to be a ticketing mechanism where you put a sticker on there and say, let's not do that again, or perhaps we will have to establish some kind of a fine through a bylaw.
Councillor Hall, through the chair, at this point, staff working with our contractor, we haven't anticipated that, and we haven't set up any provisions. You raise a good point, and we'll have to look into that. I know that based on the experience in other communities, that there is a certain level of contamination that occurs. The contamination rates that I've heard from other communities range in the rate of 2 to 5%, and typically what happens is that at the processor, they deal with the contamination, but if contamination rates get too high, then yes, definitely we have to take steps to do something to that.
Mr. Chung?
Councilor, through the mayor, normally what we do in those type of situations is no different than if residents put some green waste into a clear plastic bags. We have those stickers and we place on the plastic bag and informing the residents that you cannot put those grass clippings in a clear plastic bag, and you need to put in a craft bags or a garbage bin with that sticker on. So we can do something very similar, and we can put that sticker onto the green waste bin, informing the residents that you have placed some garbage in amongst the green organic waste, and please refrain from doing so in the future. We'll give that warning, and if it happens again, we may not collect that garbage from them. So that's something that we need to work through as we move along with this program.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Vlieg? I have already had some complaints from people who don't like the change, who don't understand why. We've had a lot of debate around this council table of one wanting to reduce garbage streams so that we can comply with what Metro is trying to do. We have also had, people think that it's a given that they should get it every week and they should have 2 cans every week, and yet when you look, very few people actually end up using 2 cans as they recycle more. So I think the key here is for the public to know that we're trying to do 2 things. One is ultimately reduce cost, but as importantly, maybe more importantly, change the way we deal with waste for the betterment of the environment and all of those other issues, which ultimately will benefit all of us. So I just encourage the residents to know we're just not doing this on a whim and thinking it's let's change for the sake of change. There's been a lot of talk, and they may not have been aware of it. And the only concern is the time, and it's coming quickly. I mean, January is here quickly. We've got to start at some time, and there's going to be some hiccups. And I guess, Mr. Vlieg, the question that I have is, our staff is prepped for what we can anticipate is a fair amount of phone calls and feedback, and I'm assuming our hauler is as well, because that number's out there.
Yes, Your Worship. We have been briefing staff, both the switchboard as well as the engineering department staff, and we're going to be working on developing a list of frequently asked questions, because similar to you, there have been some phone calls that have come through the city to staff, and we'll be having that all set and ready for staff so that they can have answers to the questions as they arise.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, and I appreciate the support of the media in getting that message out there, because as I said, one of the biggest things is change is never easy, and there's never a good time to institute it, but if it's the right thing to do, we just got to get on with it. So thank you very much. Moving on to administration reports, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Minchuk to introduce our guest, and we will be dealing with the Brownfield redevelopment strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The City of Langley continues to be aggressively at the forefront of economic development initiatives. This evening, the purpose of the Brownfield redevelopment strategy being presented is to act as a catalyst to encourage investment in the redevelopment of underutilized commercial and industrial lands. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Gordon Easton, Director of Planning and Development Management of Colliers International, to highlight the Brownfield redevelopment strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present our report. Over, I guess, the last 4 months or so, we've been working quite diligently to pull together a lot of the pieces comprising the Brownfield redevelopment strategy on behalf of the city. I believe a full copy of the report is attached with your council package, but I'll try to be fairly brief in running through some of the key findings of our study. In terms of just the presentation this evening, just wanted to cover really 6 items. The first one is the introduction to brownfields. What are they? Why are they important? A bit of the study context, why specifically they're important for the City of Langley. Current brownfield initiatives, both across the country and more locally. A couple of case studies, future consideration, next steps, and a bit of a SWOT analysis with respect to the city specifically. Colliers is very pleased to participate in this study. We have undertaken a number of other policy-related studies on behalf of the City of Langley, and this study, I think, builds well on the recent OCP, the Downtown Master Plan, as well as the Economic Development Strategy. And it tries to explore the economic reality of brownfield developments, and particularly in a smaller community that is somewhat land constrained. The reuse of some of the underutilized sites, I think, is key to moving forward. As part of our study, we did circulate as a final draft our study to Hamera Consultants, and they are a prominent group involved in the study of brownfields. And they wrote quite a complimentary letter back to the city, both in terms of congratulating the city on having a vision for the redevelopment in which the brownfield sites reside. Secondly, having champions at the local government level to communicate and foster partnerships, both through mayor and council and staff. And thirdly, programs and incentives to help overcome the barriers associated with the development of brownfield sites. With respect to brownfields, the definition, and most people, we drive by these sites all the time. We kind of notice that they're underutilized, they're vacant. There doesn't look like there's a lot of activity. Typically, very little employment happens with them. And typically, that's a result of previous contamination. Typically, they are commercial or industrial sites. The incentive for regenerating some of these sites is provision of a higher and better use. It instigates new commercial or light industrial opportunities, typically. It upgrades the area and improves the tax base for the city as well as employment. The specific objectives of our study were to understand the brownfield redevelopment process, and that involves both locally the approving authorities as well as the province, typically, who signs off or issues a certificate of compliance for a clean contaminated site. Identification of the underutilized brownfield sites throughout the city, and specifically the areas that we focused on. The importance of these sites as it relates to the somewhat limited land supply with respect to the city. The densification required for future growth. So we have looked at sort of future forecasts of where population, both residential and supporting facilities, commercial and industrial uses might go over time. Potential for higher tax revenues and employment. And finally, that ultimate transition in land uses. City is not alone. The topic overall is very much in the industry and in the news these days. So I think the timing of the study and the proactive approach to it is certainly well warranted. In terms of the players or the participants in the brownfield redevelopment, it is a complex relationship. So not only do you have the local approving authority and council in terms of the land use change, you have a landowner typically who may transact with a developer for a future land use. Typically a financing partner, being a bank, warrants or demands that a phase 1 or phase 2 environmental study is undertaken before they actually release funding to do the new redevelopment. The provincial government ties into that process typically as the sign-off authority or agent in terms of saying that it has a certificate of compliance, it's now clean, ready to go. And then of course there's the consultants, the real estate professionals, and lawyers who get involved in that process as well. So it is a fairly complex process. The area of focus we studied on within the city primarily focuses on the Logan Avenue bypass and 203 area. In terms of the OCP, it's really the purple area just north of the downtown area and could provide for a logical infill in terms of uses as the city grows and expands. Currently, your OCP does address, obviously, some of the land use questions. When we get a little further into the study, we do recommend some modifications to that specific to the City of Langley, which could help be proactive in changing the land use. The city doesn't have, as I mentioned earlier, a huge inventory of vacant land, so the reutilization and cleanup of these lands, the brownfield sites, is important, and it is a viable economic development objective. Coming out of the downtown master plan, we believe that this will fulfill not only the intensification of land uses, but also meet broader community development objectives. So some of the questions we asked ourselves while going through the study: why bother redeveloping? Why even address the issue? In some cases where there are existing businesses that are somewhat marginal, where would those businesses move to? In some instances where cities have undeveloped land, they can bring on new development sites and relocate development, freeing up development or sites for future intensification. And what initiatives can help expedite this land use change? There's a number of barriers involved with brownfield redevelopment, and a lot of those involve the detailed analysis of what contaminants are on site and how deep those go, and the cost of that. Secondly, there's a time of remediation, study, and receiving certification of the environmental reports through the province. Typically, that then allows the municipality to change the land use. There is an element of uncertainty, both in time frame, cost, and ultimately end use. If there's only a marginal increase in land value as a result of these activities, it usually isn't enough of an incentive to lever this redevelopment. Relocation challenges where existing properties or industrial uses may go. We're not trying to necessarily get rid of all the industrial uses because we do recognize they contribute to tax and employment base, but there are sometimes better locations for some of those marginal uses than others. And last but not least is the access to capital, both during the redevelopment phase as well as the remediation. We looked across Canada, and there's a number of federal government funding programs. I'll run through these very quickly. The Green Municipal Fund, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, Federal Gas Tax Fund. A couple of these are geared specifically for new technology in brownfield development sites or reducing the carbon footprint significantly, but they do exist. On the provincial side of things, there's also a couple of programs. The BC Infrastructure Program does allow for a grant of up to $10,000 for brownfield revitalization. The Brownfield Renewal Funding Program has more significant funding available, and these, depending on where you are in the process, does allow some fairly significant money, and that helps sometimes to bridge the gap or incentivize developers to undertake the process. This is just a clip, basically a paraphrasing of the previous programs. So both provincially and federally, there's a number of grants and loans that help assist in the redevelopment process for brownfields. With respect to initiatives the local government can undertake, these are tools that would be available to the City of Langley. Similar to downtown redevelopments or other redevelopment initiatives, the municipality can provide tax relief for up to 10 years under the community charter. It can't affect the federal or provincial tax component, but certainly the municipal side of things, it could be discounted. Concessions on building permit fees or reductions, DCC credits or reductions. There are a number of loan programs, as mentioned, which provide funding at fairly attractive rates. And in some cases, not necessarily the city, because you are fairly expeditious in terms of civic approvals, but there could be expedited approvals process, which alleviates some of the time frame for the developer in seeking the land use change as well as building permit approvals. Just a couple of local examples. This site's in Maple Ridge. It's a vacant site currently. It's suspected of being a previous dumping ground. There's somewhat uncertain levels of contamination. Significant monies have been spent to date, but in terms of Maple Ridge taking the initiative to try to incentivize development, they have, changed the OCP designation in advance of a developer coming on board. They're giving significant permit fee discounts, a 3-year property tax exemption, reduced parking, assisted with grant applications and priority approvals. Some of that makes a significant difference to the development community, and there's currently a redevelopment in the planning stages for that site. Richmond, this site is just off Steveston. Most people have probably been by it. Quite attractive site. It had contamination some time ago. Part of the incentive was covered by a DCC rebate program. It was quite a small series of sites, so there was some difficulty in assembling the lots. There was no community plan that existed, so the developer had to go through that process. But at the end of the day, it ended up being a very vital part of the Steveston community, and it's no provincial or federal funding was granted for that project. So just to summarize some of the municipal tools that are available, establishing a municipal development role, and we recognize that the city has been quite a proactive partner in a lot of the development that has gone on and in the downtown revitalization. We commend you for becoming involved in that particular aspect of development. Blanket preliminary contamination risk assessment. So in that case, you would look at some of these areas on a wholesale basis rather than individual developers studying individual sites over a period of time. You would take the initiative to basically study larger areas that are very strategic sites in your view. Providing tax exemptions that can be attractive. Prioritizing brownfields in the planning process. And again, we think the city has been quite proactive on the approval side of things. Undertaking a detailed site inventory, so when developers come to your city, they have quite already an upper hand in terms of understanding what the previous uses were on some of those properties. Promoting interim uses, if there are derelict sites or vacant sites, there may be some interim things that could happen there. With food trucks being so popular, there could be a food truck rodeo, all kinds of different things that aren't necessarily affecting the ultimate outcome of the land, but providing more pedestrian interest and activity on the site. And finally, rezoning and text amendments, which basically take any development risk away for the developer, so he understands the ultimate development potential of that land. Specifically to the City of Langley, we'd recommend a revisit of the OCP to include a wider range of uses in the industrial zones based on the regional growth strategy. Continuing with the expedited approval processes and making that known to the development community. Potentially offering city-funded grants for brownfield renewal projects, and this may be very limited, but for very strategic sites. And possibly upzoning some of the land in advance of development opportunities. So rather than a developer coming in, going through the process on a one-off basis, there is that upzone land that has the development potential already identified and that additional value provided. Lastly, we looked at a number of the strengths and weaknesses, both of the industrial and the city in generally. Number of strengths, low residential and business property tax rates compared to the surrounding communities. Unique pedestrian-oriented development in the downtown core area. High quality of life and community cohesiveness. Low DCCs. Fast and flexible development approvals process. Knowledgeable and professional staff. Pro-development council. Signs that new activity, Cactus Club and luxury auto dealers are soon opening. There are a number of weaknesses. It's challenging to find a site. There's a small inventory of developable sites in the city. With absentee owners, that sometimes can make it hard to acquire or assemble lands. Aging municipal infrastructure, in some cases, can require upgrading, which can become costly when looking at higher density development. Perceived weakness of demand of redeveloped properties. So there's a market perception maybe that the uptake won't be there. Unstable deep soil conditions make it challenging for high density developments, and it's sometimes more expensive than other areas. Doesn't mean it can't happen, it just means technically and cost wise it's a little more expensive. Some safety or stigma associated with downtown area and safety, and limited opportunity to attract investors, thus development targeted at end users, really the owner user. Certainly there's some opportunities in going forward. The city can take an active role in either assembling or promoting properties to remove some of the uncertainties. Emerging renewed emphasis on local development character and quality of life when marketing. These sites that are underutilized are close to very good amenities in the downtown core. And obviously there's the potential to get behind light rail transit and market these sites as close to transit-oriented development potential. There are a couple of threats as well. We continue to see SkyTrain-related station areas or mass public transit locations more appealing in some cases from an employment basis. Tolling on the Port Mann Bridge could, for the short term, impact some developments south of the Fraser. Proposed Surrey Casino may impact Langley's Casino, and higher cost of development to the city relative to other parts of the region. One of the recommendations that we had suggested, and I think Mr. Minchuk is going to pick up on this, is hosting a workshop in the new year combining all groups, and I think that's really important because that rarely happens. So including the province, the BC Environmental Industry Association, city staff, development community, mayor and council, really trying to get together and look at all the steps in the process and how those can best be expedited and handled from a development perspective.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minchuk. Did you want to add anything else before I open it for questions or comments?
Furthermore, Mr. Mayor, the city will be hosting and partnering with the Urban Development Institute on February 5th to highlight not only this Brownfield redevelopment initiative, but some of the other recent initiatives opening the door to development opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Well, I was quite pleased to see this report in our agenda. And I've been sitting here trying to think whether it was a UBCM or an FCM that I went to a workshop on brownfields. And when I went, I was never familiar with that phrase, and I wasn't sure what to expect, but I think it was called brownfield developments, and anytime it's development, I'm interested in going, so I went. And was quite surprised, I mean, basically what you said here. But they had a lot of examples of before and afters. And I think that's what really amazed me as what, a piece of land that you look at and you think is absolutely no use at all and turn it into something, whether it's a housing development. I think one of them, they turned into some kind of a water plant. And I don't know what city it was, or I don't even remember what city I went to this.
It was FCM.
It was FCM, but I'm not sure. I don't know whether it was Saskatoon or the year before. But anyways, it was very interesting. So I was very happy to see this, and looking forward to having some development with these properties in our community. And I'm happy to hear that we're going to be doing this with the UDI in February. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Councillor Hall.
I'm kind of wondering what kind of time frame we're talking here in terms of the recommendations, because one of the observations is that as transit is extended out here, many of those people that are sitting on land are waiting to see what comes about in terms of that transit, and they have great expectations in their head that their property that we look at now and think is marginal is just going to boom in terms of commercial development. So are we thinking 10-year time frame here or a 20-year time frame? What's the expectation on these recommendations?
Mr. Minchuk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Hall. While a specific time frame is not identified for each and every recommendation, the study clearly articulates some opportunities that we can focus on immediately with respect to our regional growth strategy that's scheduled for updating next year, and in conjunction with that, some OCP amendments as well as some zoning amendments. Recognizing again, one of our successes in recent years has been marketing these initiatives, and we're starting that marketing process with the development industry on February 5th. And looking forward to discussing with City Council in our upcoming Blue Sky sessions how this fits in with future work program opportunities as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hall?
One of the recommendations is that the city get actively involved in land assembly, but the challenge for the city is how much capital do we have available to direct that way. So I'm thinking maybe we have to start looking at some of the other things you suggested. Now, the tax exemption one is interesting, but you suggested that if we provided that tax exemption, the province and the federal government portions wouldn't be affected. But I thought when we gave tax exemptions in other areas like a school, a private school, or a church property, a parking lot, or whatever, that when we, if we withdrew the tax exemption, then everything would click in, and they would lose their exemption on province and federal. So if you go in the other direction, if we were to provide the exemption, why doesn't the provincial and the federal kick in at the same time?
Mr. Minchuk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, the report presented this evening identified a number of local government tools or opportunities, one of which relates to tax exemption. We're not advocating. We need to have more discussion with Council on those initiatives. But the report also comments and commends the City of Langley in recent years of our success in acquiring properties, packaging properties to the development industry with respect to Fraser Crossing on Fraser Highway. Even prior to that, the Cascades Casino development, and even how we've shaped the built form along Langley Bypass, changing that historically industrial corridor into a big box retail mecca. Those are some things that we have done in recent years, and continue to explore other unique opportunities, how we can play a role, a partnership role, as Colliers identifies in the redevelopment of our community. Thank you.
And I wanted to add that both UBCM and FCM, as part of the sustainability issue and infrastructure renewal, has said to both the federal government and the provincial government that they need to come to the table more in some creative ways so that we can partner more. The tools in here are municipal tools, and statutory exemptions like churches and schools we have no control over. But we don't get the municipal tax on certain portions of that. But other things that we might do gives us that ability, but it doesn't require the province or the feds to come along necessarily. So that's part of what's being discussed in that whole arena as well, because I think ultimately what we need to be able to do is to bring those things forward. As Gerald said, we'll be sitting down and looking at what incentives we really think are going to deliver results, because at the end of the day, if we can see this happen, higher and better use means higher tax revenue, means even though we may give an exemption, that ultimately within a 5-year period we start to see much higher returns to the city taxes, because we have higher and more better use than what we currently have. So it's going to be a work in progress, but I want to commend Gerald and Colliers for two things. one, we're ahead of the curve. We're one of the first local governments to put something like this together. And the letter that we got from Hamera really speaks to that. And I think that it shows the development community, again, that we're ahead of the curve and we're wanting to see a partnership between them and us. And I think this is going to stand us in very good stead. And that's why the UDI function is one of the first things we can do to, again, show that we're doing what we are. Council? Yeah, go ahead.
One of the suggestions was to change the zoning in particular areas. So we have specific industrial zone. We have a transitionary area. So are we looking at something more than that, or are we better suited the way we've gone in the past with a comprehensive development for each individual?
Mr. Minchuk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Hall. Those are some of the specific strategic initiatives staff want to discuss with Council. The philosophical approach to pre-zoning lands, lands, for example, along 203rd Street that are currently zoned service commercial, but are envisioned in our downtown master plan for higher and better uses. That's what this study sort of pumps the prime to engage us to take some progressive, to continue to take some progressive steps in that direction. Thank you.
And I think it was an anticipation, Councillor Martin, I'll come to you in a second, of that where we, in the regional growth strategy, took some industrial lands that we had and took them out of that designation as part of the regional growth strategy because we knew we were going to focus on those for higher and better use. Mr. Minchuk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, further to Councillor Hall's comment, it's part of the regional growth strategy that we negotiated with Metro Vancouver. We did set the stage, interestingly enough, to change some of the industrial lands along the Logan Avenue corridor to mixed employment, to a mixed employment category, to broaden and to heighten the upside of redevelopment of those areas.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I just want to say that this letter that we got from Hamera, they're saying that there's a BC Ministry of Environment conference in March 2013, and they're going to be involved as the lead coordinator for planned Brownfield stream. I'm wondering if we could get more information on that conference and see if it is going to be specific, the whole thing, to Brownfield developments, and just get more information on that.
Mr. Minchuk?
It was very coincidental that I attended a Brownfield committee meeting a few months ago. I didn't know such a committee existed at the provincial level, and following that, we engaged with some of the Brownfield community stakeholder associations, such as Hamera, and they were very excited, recognizing that they're a nationally recognized consulting firm, that this would be the first, in fact, it's reflected in this strategy. This Brownfield redevelopment strategy is the first of its kind at the local government level in British Columbia. So even one of the challenges that we faced in trying to extract some best practices for this strategy, we're having to be gleaned from primarily the Ontario industrial belt areas. But so we think, the timing of this strategy works extremely well to perhaps attend, perhaps even present at this upcoming Brownfield organization's annual conference and take it from there.
I don't think we should be shy in presenting, because I think that gets the word out in as many ways as we can. So, absolutely. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I will take a motion to receive this report. Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Arnold. That said, all of those in favor? It is carried. Thank you very much for your presentation, and Mr. Minchuk, we look forward to ongoing discussions in this area. Now moving into administrative reports, item B, committees. We have a number of motions here, so I'm going to ask for someone to move that council adopt A, B, C, D, and E policy committee or policies for committees. You've had them in your package. I don't think we need to read all of them. Would someone like to move that? Moved by Councillor James, seconded by Councillor Martin. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all of those in favor. Opposed, if any, it's carried. The next one is that council repeal policy CO27, terms of reference. Someone like to move that? Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Hall. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all of those in favor. Opposed, if any, it is carried. Now that council amend policy CO28, annual reports for committees to reflect the new policies. Need a mover? Councillor James, seconded by Councillor Martin. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all of those in favor. Opposed, if any, it is carried. And now we will move to page 85 of our agenda, and I'm just going to get down there. So page 85, the motion that is before us, that council appoint the following members to committees listed below for a period of January 1, 2013 to December 31, 2013. Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Arnold. One change, which is an administrative change, under the CPR committee, I would ask that you add in there a note that the two mayors share the chairing of those committees. We appoint council members to it, but the mayors are also in attendance and they share the chairing of that with the CPR representative. Councillor James?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just spotted this actually on page 89. I think it should be December 31st, 2013.
Yes, it should be. We'll make that correction. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all of those in favor. Opposed, if any, the motion is carried. And now I need a motion for the city to support the GVRD Labor Relations Service bylaw, which is in your agenda. Someone like to move that? Moved by Councillor James, seconder. Councillor Martin, any questions or comments? Seeing none, all of those in favor. Opposed, if any, the motion is carried. The next one is, I'll get to it. Forgive me, we just got lots of background material on all of these. The recommendation, I need a motion that council receive the report at the at-grade rail crossing regulations. Moved by Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor James. Just for the sake of the media who may read this, the city was one of the most proactive again in the country on this issue. And as is in the report, and Mr. Vlieg, if there are any questions, I'm sure you'll be able to address them, Mr. Chung. But that we have made the point that some of the initial recommendations we've been heard, and there has been some significant movement. There's going to be ongoing dialogue. Is there any questions for Mr. Vlieg on this and the report? Councillor Hall.
The next meeting of the CP Rail Advisory Committee is not until about March or something like that. Is there any anticipation that there will be some idea of what the changes might be, or is that prior to the public consultation?
It will be coming at the public consultation. Mr. Vlieg, do you want to speak to the sequencing of that?
Councillor Hall, through the chair. When we last spoke to officials at Transport Canada, they had indicated that they would be working with staff lawyers to prepare the regulations for gazetting. They had indicated to us that the gazetted material probably would show up sometime in late March or early April. That's the best they've been able to give us to date. As we find out more information, then obviously we'll pass that along to council. With regards to the community advisory, that's an excellent venue for staff to meet with CP The interesting part is with the regulations, there are certain pieces of the regulations that municipalities and the railways agree with, but there's other pieces of the regulation that the municipalities and the railroads are almost in direct opposition in terms of their particular stance on.
Councillor Hall?
As a follow-up, so that committee really only meets infrequently. It's like quarterly, and then the last one was canceled. So this is the first time that this committee's met in quite a while. It would be really useful to at least have in draft form some of the recommendations that are coming out, just as a means of dialogue in that meeting. 'Cause otherwise, that once again, maybe the last notice for that committee was that because of lack of agenda items, the meeting was canceled. Well, I think we should have an opportunity to hold CP to the fire to some extent and be able to review some of it.
I would suggest, I've had a discussion with Mayor Froese, and I think that there may be need for discussion at the council level even before we have the next meeting. So what staff on both the township, and not just the township and the city, but Surrey and every other community that's affected, is as we get more information and as we know where they're heading, we may have a special meeting to deal with that issue alone. So it's not tied to those meetings, it's tied to our response collectively as municipalities. And FCM is very involved in this as well because of the resolution passed in Saskatoon. So I think we're going to stay on top of it because it isn't just about CP, it's about CN, it's about everybody. And so it falls even out of the terms of reference of that particular committee. We've just used that committee as a sounding board for certain things, but this, I think, transcends even that. So we'll make sure that we stay on top of it. Correct? Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, all of those in favor, opposed if any, the motion is carried. Moving into bylaws, bylaw 2896, final reading of a bylaw to amend the City of Langley zoning bylaw 1996, number 2100, to rezone the property located at 5923 Production Way to C2 Service Commercial Zone. Do I have a mover? Councillor Arnold, seconded by Councillor Schaefer. All those in favor, opposed if any, it is carried. Bylaw 2905, first, second, and third reading of a bylaw to amend the fees and charges bylaw to include telecommunication fees. Is there a mover? Councillor Schaefer, seconded by Councillor Arnold. Any questions? Seeing none, all of those in favor, opposed if any, it is carried. There are no motions and notices of motion. There is a piece that we do have to do, so everybody will don their, because we are live streamed. Staff refuse to put on these hats, and if you put your button, you'll flash. And there is no correspondence. Is there any other unfinished business? I'll get to that under new business. Is there any new business? Seeing none, I think on behalf of every single member of council, we want to wish all of our staff a very Merry Christmas and a productive and fruitful and what I could say revenue-generating new year in new development, just as a goal. And I want to thank one member of the public who is in the audience, has been faithful for the last while. Wish you a very Merry Christmas and your family. And to our members of the media, please pass on that we were festive at the end of our meeting and wanting to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. Thank you for your contribution to our meetings. And with that said, Councillor Arnold.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Every year I have to do this. I just want to be the first to wish everyone a happy 2014. In case anybody's wondering, I wanted to be the first. And also, I'd like to...
Yeah.
And also, I would like to wish you a very happy birthday on Friday, Mr. Mayor.
It's actually Thursday, but I'll take it for Friday, and it gives me one more day to get over it.
You stay younger a day longer. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much, and to all of members of council, a very merry and safe Christmas, and enjoy the time. And I will say this, I sent a note to all of the members of UBCM executive in light of what just recently happened in the United States. And it reminds me that at this time of the year to hold those that we hold dear, whether we work with them or we live with them, close to us, because we never know what life may throw our way. And we need to remember what we do here is important, but in the scheme of things, when you hear those things, it's just stuff. So Merry Christmas, and with that, motion to adjourn. Seconder, it is carried. Thank you all. Have a Merry Christmas.